Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. How are we today? Last day of the Cancer Congress. Are you relieved? So much happening over the last 4 days, isn't it? But welcome to the last debate of the Cancer Congress. And it's titled, "The Time Has Come to Stop Investing in Chemoprevention Trials." It's interesting, I've spoken to a few oncologists here in Malaysia, and it's not something that we have started giving out, but it's great to have this discussion nevertheless. We know that preventing cancer is urgent. We know that. We know the causes of cancer is multifactorial, but should we be putting money into chemoprevention trials is what we're going to be discussing today. I am Meera Sivasothy. I'm going to be your moderator for this debate. I am a radio host at a radio station called BFM 89.9 in Malaysia. So before I introduce our speakers, I want you to do a poll, a short poll for us. If you can whip out your phones, open up the Congress app, go into the icon that says live polling. And what I need you to do is tell us whether you agree or disagree with this topic. And what we will do is, after the debate, we'll do a poll again to see if you've changed your mind. Live polling, debate 3. Agree or disagree, and just click on finish. Oops. Who's got to be working harder? Can we lock it in at about 60-40? 62-38 it is. 38 of you agree that we should stop. Most of you think that we shouldn't stop investing in chemopreventive trials. So here we go. Our debaters for today. Debating for the topic, Professor David Weller. He's a professor of general practice, Center for Population Health Sciences from the University of Edinburgh. Welcome, David. How are you today? And on my right, debating against this topic is Dr. Richard Wender. He's the Chief Cancer Control Officer from the American Cancer Society. Now, I have to say that we're very glad Richard has taken on this challenge because he's on the verge of losing his voice. I almost thought we had to cancel the session, but he's going to go ahead with it anyway. Don't feel sorry for him in any way whatsoever when you decide on your poll at the end of this session. So, the format of the debate, each speaker will be given 10 minutes each to present his arguments, after which we will go into a 20-minute session where we will take questions from you, and then the debaters will come back and conclude 5 minutes each, and then our 60 minutes is up. Shall we go? So, presenting for the topic, Professor David Weller. Take it away, David. Yep, I'm going to go.
Richard first.
Okay, Richard, who you want to go first? Okay, all right then, because I feel sorry for you. Go ahead, Richard. Take it away.
Well, and that's because what they said. So, well, thank you. So, could do my best. I'm going to speak very low register. I'm going to sound like Elvis Presley for anyone who knows Elvis. Thank you very much.
Shut your eyes, it works very well for radio. That sort of voice works very well, Richard.
Today, we have 3 overarching ways to reduce cancer death rates. We can prevent the development of cancer. We can detect cancers during an asymptomatic phase when they're most amenable to removal or destruction. And 3, we can find more effective treatments, but usually those are cancers diagnosed through symptoms, which is often not a good thing. Those are it. Those are the 3. All of them have limitations. Population-wide screening is only proven to be effective for 6 cancers: cervix, colon, rectal, breast, prostate, and lung, and that's in high risk. So that means there's other cancers for which we cannot screen. Second, despite advances in treatment of advanced cancers, the majority are not curable. So it's important to diagnose them. But the reality is, if you get an advanced cancer, even if you're cured, even if you live a long time, it's likely to have an impact on your quality of life. The treatment is very expensive, and there are many barriers to receiving that care, particularly in low and middle income countries. Even screening is very difficult. Oh boy, screening oh God. Screening is very difficult to deliver if you do not have diagnostic testing available and if you do not have treatment available. So many countries cannot screen even for these diseases. So let's talk about something we all care about and believe in, and that's prevention. So 5 strategies for prevention. 1 is cancer screening, because we can screen for and treat the precursors to cancers. We can remove precancerous colon polyps, find precancer abnormalities of the cervix. Second, and perhaps most important, is to avoid the proven causes of cancer. Avoid tobacco, obesity, alcohol. 3 is to do things that are good for us. Eat vegetables, maintain a healthy weight, exercise regularly, use sun protection. 4, something we're so excited about, is vaccination against hepatitis B and, of course, HPV. But there's a 5th strategy that we've not taken advantage of, and that is chemoprevention. So what is chemoprevention? Chemoprevention is taking a substance that may be natural or may be manufactured, that by taking it reduces your risk of cancer. You could even be a cream, something you apply. The first thing I want you to know about chemoprevention is that it actually is proven to work. Tamoxifen offers a 30% reduction in breast cancer incidence in appropriately selected women. Raloxifene also works, but somewhat less effectively than tamoxifen. And then for postmenopausal women, the aromatase inhibitors, such as anastrozole and exemestane, offer more than a 50% reduction in breast cancer incidence. For colorectal cancer, salicylates, specifically aspirin, nonsteroidals, the COX-2 inhibitors, reduce risk of polyps, and there's even polyp regression. It's probably associated with a small risk, a proven risk in colorectal cancer. Perhaps most impressive is a lower risk of ovarian cancer with the use of oral contraceptives, even in women who are positive for the BRCA mutation. Prostate cancer, 5-alpha reductase drugs lower the risk. Some debate whether they reduce aggressive cancers. Of all these agents, the one that holds the most promise right now is aspirin. It's associated with lower deaths for colon, gastric, and esophageal cancer, and there's some thought it could even have a proven effect on some other cancers, like prostate and breast. So I will ask you, does any chemopreventive agent today meet all of the criteria that I'm going to show you right now? In order for it to be accepted, it has to work. It has to be acceptable. People will have to be willing to do it. And 3, clinicians need to be ready to recommend it and prescribe it. And I will tell you that not a single chemopreventive agent meets all three criteria today. Not a single one. Now that I've made David's argument for him, let me tell you why it's wrong. This is not the moment to be reducing our investment in developing chemoprevention strategies. It would be a serious mistake. Here's why. One, the model of allowing cancers to be diagnosed and then try to rescue these patients with expensive toxic treatment, which is where we invest almost all our research money, is an enormous mistake. Two, we can find strategies that could help people anywhere in the world, regardless of where they live, to avoid a cancer. And if we can find even one agent, that would be an incredible accomplishment. Three, as I said, this is not a theoretical concept. It does work. We just have to find the right agents that meet the other criteria. Four, very importantly, we're entering an entirely new era in assessing individual risk. We will be able to find people based either on on genetic profile, or a more detailed analysis of things like breast density or other risks for cancer that will identify people at higher risk so that you do not have to use chemoprevention in everyone. Now, it's true, genetic testing and evaluation is expensive. It's not universally available, but it will be. It will be within a very short time. And in the meantime, we have to be finding and applying this methodology through research. I believe we can reach a tipping point in chemoprevention. We are underutilizing some chemoprevention agents today. There are women who should have been on the birth control pill due to ovarian risk, as long as they didn't want to be bearing children at that moment, who've not been recommended. There are women who would have been very good candidates for raloxifene who were never recommended. Here's how we have to fulfill the promise of chemoprevention. One, we need a clear research plan. This is not the moment to be backing off of our investment. Two, we do need an infusion of young investigators interested in this field. It's a serious problem right now. Three, we must recognize that given the choice of being cured of cancer or living with cancer as a chronic disease, most people would opt to never have developed cancer. They want to have this cancer prevented. So to summarize, this is not the moment to stop our investment in chemoprevention. And I look forward to the discussion. Part of what we have to do is change our marketing approach to chemoprevention. It sounds awfully scary, and it's scaring people off. We have to make this more of a mainstream option. Thank you so much for letting me participate.
Thank you very much, Richard. Debating for the topic, the time has come to stop investing in chemoprevention trials, Professor David Weller.
Thanks very much. Well, as you can see, I've not lost my voice. I wouldn't use such a cheap ploy, really, to try and get your sympathy. When you're considering how you vote at the end of this, I want you to just disregard everything that Richard and I say, and just look at this photo. Which side to you is more appealing? Do we want to be adopting healthy lifestyles, or do we want to be basing our lives on taking pills? I work as a GP in a deprived area of Edinburgh. I try and do the best for my patient. Now I am losing my voice. I try and do the best for my patients. I try and get them to stop smoking. I try and get them to exercise. Do I want my patients in that waiting room to be dependent on pills for their survival? I most definitely don't. So as Richard has said, why chemoprevention? We have a whole range of ways of detecting mutations now. Traditionally, the approach has been to screen people more frequently and adopt healthy lifestyles, but now we do have this potential for chemoprevention. But where is it leading us? Well, I won't go over all the evidence again. My feeling on balance around aspirin and NSAIDs is that it is quite reasonable. We've had some large prospective trials, albeit not based, with the largest ones weren't based with colorectal cancer as the main outcome. It was cardiovascular disease. We don't actually have a proper long-term prospective study with colorectal cancer as a primary outcome. Nevertheless, there's great potential, I think, to reduce mortality. But let's not forget the fact that in the US annually, there are 100,000 NSAID-related hospitalisations and 16,500 deaths. So even with what looks like a harmless drug like aspirin, we're still dealing with a dangerous substance. Tamoxifen, raloxifene, the aromatase inhibitors, yes, again, good evidence from the trials, a 50% potential reduction in disease, and they're impressive data. We have meta-analyses of these data showing consistent reductions in risk. Some evidence, again, for prostate cancer, as Richard has mentioned, but with some query over it, whether it might increase high-grade cancer. Other chemopreventive agents, lung cancer has been a failure, metformin is a possibility, and siloxicib in non-melanoma skin cancer. Diet-related agents, over the last several decades, there's been a huge investment in trials looking at carotenoids, vitamin E, selenium, hasn't really amounted to much, apart from the fact that the US economy spends $30 billion on dietary supplements each year. There's a lot of money to be made out of this. What about a poly pill? Why don't we just shove everything together in one pill and take that? No evidence that what should go into it, and we've not really demonstrated effectiveness. So it's complicated. Tumours are heterogeneous. If we give single agents to people over time, resistance will develop. What do we do when the chemoprevention doesn't work? How do we deal with those disappointed patients? Richard talked about the genetic information. Yes, it's huge and it's complex. There's gene-gene interactions, gene-environment interactions. I think it will be some time before we can make sense of all that information. Okay, so tamoxifen works. Women don't take it. The uptake is extraordinarily, disappointingly low, typically less than 10%. Have a look at the trial there on the bottom left-hand corner. They used a complex decision support model and gave women all sorts of information about benefits and harmful effects. The result of that trial, they took even less tamoxifen. So well-informed women it doesn't encourage compliance with that sort of medication. So poor uptake when good evidence, even when the evidence is there, low interest in taking chemoprevention, women conceptualise risk in different ways. If 10% of women have a twofold increase, and only 10% choose to take it, if tamoxifen reduces breast cancer by 50%, that will prevent less than 1% of breast cancers. So are we being too negative about it? Perhaps we're just in the early days of chemoprevention. We have had some successes. Perhaps we just need to educate the public and educate doctors. Perhaps we're being too sceptical. I don't think we are. I think we're being appropriately cautious. The alternative. Some of you might have been to the session before lunch on the economics of primary prevention. Trial after trial has demonstrated the cost-effectiveness of public health interventions targeting simple things like cigarettes and alcohol. In the UK, we spend about 3% of our budget on prevention. Now, that's a shameful figure, and it's falling each year. Where are our priorities? The World Health Organization would certainly say that we need to be investing in these more simple measures. Medicalisation. Do we really want a society where we're all taking pills to reduce our risk? Just think about that for a moment. Think about some of the societal reasons why chemoprevention hasn't taken off. Think about some of the adverse effects of having to take a pill every day just to try and offset some future risk. What does that do to your dynamics of how you conceptualise illness in your life? Yes, we can do more risk profiling. Genetics is exploding, but we've not got on top of the privacy issues, the legal issues, the potential for bias, the underrepresentation of racial and ethnic minorities in some of those genotype-phenotype studies. So let's invest in the things that we know. Over half of cancer-related deaths can be prevented by lifestyle changes. Think about that. And every penny that we invest in chemoprevention is a penny less that we invest in these simple, proven measures that we know work. So there is an opportunity cost. We've heard a lot over the last 2 or 3 days about things that are happening at a global level, WHO actions, UICC actions. I haven't heard one mention of chemoprevention, particularly in lower middle income countries. Where does this fascination with tablets leave those countries that often can't afford any basic, just very basic healthcare for their population? I don't think that's about promoting global equity at all. So this is a heated, emotional debate. You can see what happens when epidemiologists get upset with each other. There's one paper called The Failure of Cancer Chemoprevention, and a letter back saying cancer chemoprevention is not a failure. That's a pretty tough debate, isn't it? But what I think, instead of focusing our efforts in working out whether chemoprevention works or not, we should focus on these much more proven methods. So Paracelsus, a famous physician, said poison is everything and no thing is without poison. So everything that we take into our body causes effects. David Hume, it's impossible to separate the chance of good from the risk of ill. Imagine an overly medicated society with all of these accumulating side effects. Ivan Illich got it right when he was talking about the dangers of medicalisation. So is chemotherapy likely to be a major player in reducing cancer incidence? I don't think so. I think it's going to be peripheral. We need to back the right horse. We've only got a certain amount of funds to invest in cancer prevention. Why would we be chasing after these new markers where we know that setting up these phase 2 and phase 3 trials is a huge investment, billions and billions of dollars, and that's money that could be spent on more basic and efficacious approaches. So while some agents do impact on cancer without doubt, we need to stop investing money in further chemoprevention trials. We underinvest in preventive measures, which we know work. There's this poor uptake by patients and doctors. That's probably an informed choice. New chemopreventive agents will emerge, and with them the need for clinical trials. That would be a huge investment. We don't want to over-medicalise our patients. It increases healthcare disparities potentially, and I think there are some major unanswered moral and ethical questions with this whole approach. No conflicts of interest apart from the fact that I'm a middle-aged white male, but so is my opponent. And thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, David. You know, David, you said half of cancers are caused by lifestyle factors, right? And we know that some of us can do all the right things and still get cancer. Where does chemoprevention fall into that mix of unforced errors in DNA copying, heredity factors, environmental factors? Where does chemoprevention fall into that?
I guess you could argue that for the agents where we've got some evidence, and I'd really only put the hormone modifiers and aspirin and NSAIDs into that category. I think they can have a sort of adjuvant role. In my practice, my family medicine practice in Edinburgh, I put some of my patients on aspirin, patients that I know who are at high risk of cardiovascular disease, but sometimes I'm prompted by their colorectal cancer risk. So I think it can be an adjunct. But what we need to not let happen is for that to become the main purpose of prevention. I think we need to keep that focus on lifestyle and on evidence and things that really work. We don't want a obese, smoking, alcohol drinking society that just thinks they can take a pill and that's all they need to do.
Richard?
Yeah, if we were debating, when I go low I can talk. If we were debating which one we should invest in, better lifestyle, better prevention versus chemo prevention, it's a no-brainer. David won the debate. Problem is that's not the question. The question is, should we continue to invest all but 7% of our research budget in finding curative intent therapy, for which we already know the likelihood of cure is low and it has huge effects. All we're asking is, should we continue to invest a higher percent than we do today, or at least the same, and it doesn't have to be a huge increase, in finding a pill that can prevent a cancer that is not amenable to lifestyle prevention. And that's really the debate. We're in total agreement that better proven prevention, it needs more investment than it has today. But David addressed the wrong question. The wrong question is, should we be shifting some research money, or at least maintaining, to find a pill? Because there are some cancers that are not amenable today to proven prevention. All it would take is one agent proven to work for one of those cancers.
If I could just come back, I've not been answering the wrong question. I wanted to set the scene with the successes of chemoprevention over the last couple of decades, because what Richard was saying, I heard said back in 2002, we're on the cusp of a revolution. We're going to be able to do this fantastic population-based risk assessment. We're going to discover over the next couple of decades drugs, agents, which will be able to modify risk. Where has that led? Secondly, these trials, these phase 2 and phase 3 trials, as I said in my talk, are extraordinarily expensive. We've got to enrol hundreds of thousands of people just to try and detect a small effect. And there is an opportunity cost to that. There are lots of other things that we could be spending our research dollars on. We could be spending that research money on better preventive approaches, on biomarkers. A whole range of things won't happen if we keep that obsessive focus on chemoprevention trials. I think they're a huge expense with no justification.
Ladies and gentlemen, questions? Yes? Go ahead. If you can just make your way to the mic, Professor Teo, you can go up first.
Bert Wilkenstein came up with an interesting paper suggesting that from mathematical modeling that potentially 30% of cancers are due to replication and have nothing to do with preventable agents. And in addition, for the remaining diseases, maybe it's so multifactorial that the aspiration of finding one agent that could prevent that particular cancer is very unlikely. Given both of these facts or assertions or hypotheses, is it really still worth putting chemoprevention trials?
It's a very critical question. 3 points. One, we've already proven that chemoprevention works in certain cases, already proven. Number two, I think the day where we just take all women of a certain age, all men of a certain age, and we say, okay, we're going to do a big trial with this agent, should be over. I think it is going to take some more detailed risk assessment. Mechanism-derived agents, and then a focused trial with that mechanism-derived agent in that higher risk population. It will not be cheap. David and I agree. But I continue to argue, all you need is one agent for one cancer, or a combination of agents that had a big impact on one cancer, the way a vaccine can have a very big impact on a single cancer.
Yeah. So the problems we face are multiple and complex. We try to apply population risk estimates derived from these risk assessment trials to individuals. And often when it comes to an individual's absolute risk reduction, even from a quite impressive result from a chemopreventive trial, the absolute risk reduction for that individual is quite small. So I think we have to be realistic about the effects that we can achieve. And I think you're absolutely right about the complexity of genome-based risk assessment. There are all kinds of gene environments, gene interactions, gene environment interactions which cloud the picture. And I think this search for an elusive risk factor which will be cured by a drug, I just think it's futile. I don't think we've. I think if we were going to find that marker, if we were going to find that agent, we would have found it a decade ago.
Just very quickly, tamoxifen, raloxifene. Let's talk about the women. In your practice, are they open to taking these medications?
I've raised it with patients. My patients are generally uninterested, and if you look at the uptake trials in the literature, they're extraordinarily disappointed. I think people don't like the idea of taking an anti-cancer drug to try and reduce some kind of future risk, and I think they'd prefer to take other measures.
Richard, what about in America?
Yes, I would agree. The uptake clearly has been low, and I recognize that in my opening comments. It's not zero, and I can tell you that we've done a terrible job at communicating about what the right pill can do to lower risk of cancer. So I'll save that for my closing, because we need to do a much better job with that.
Okay.
Okay, yeah. Professor Devin, this for you. Yeah. In your talk, you have also agreed there are already research that has been done, and there are chemopreventive drugs available, and it's also on the usage. Maybe uptake may not be that great. But that doesn't bring to an end of the investigations. Then science of that particular section will end. No, science has to grow. At some day, certainly there will be some more drugs will come. Your only problem is the cost effectiveness. But I didn't see any data which has shown that yes, this is the cost effectiveness that comes to in making of the one single product that can give a chemoprevention. So barring that, when it is not there, just saying $30 million dollars have been spent in the States will not be everyone can agree on that.
Cost benefit.
Cost benefit, yeah. So some good modelling work has been done on chemopreventive agents, and I would concede that at the higher end of the risk strata, if you could get enough people taking this medication, the models do start becoming quite cost effective, particularly for aspirin and the NSAIDs, less so for tamoxifen related drugs. But your main question was about should we just because these trials are different, should we stop the search? I don't think we should stop trying to better assess people's risk through, that's the natural way of human endeavour. But what I'm just trying to do is introduce an element of rationality to this. We live in a global village, we've got limited world resources. Are we really going to invest that sort of money in trying to find this elusive agent? Because don't be fooled, it's going to be an incredibly difficult and expensive process to find it, at the expense of so many other strategies that we could pursue.
Richard?
I thought the question was beautifully stated. This is not the time, particularly because when we started the search for effective chemotherapy preventive agents, we knew far less than we know today. These are big trials, and ultimately you do need to conduct the big trial. Not from the start, but ultimately you do. When you compare it to what we're investing in treatment research, it's a tiny fraction.
Gentleman over there.
Hi, Professor David, I was just wondering, in the UK, I know you have elaborate ways of measuring the risk of hereditary breast cancer, and there are multiple guidelines for that. So let us say you had a patient who's at tenfold or we can pick a number, high number, increased risk of breast cancer. I was just wondering, what is the counseling process that that subject undergoes, and what all options are presented, and how do they make the choice between chemoprevention versus more mammograms and other things?
It's a complex process, and our NICE, National Institute for Clinical Excellence, has actually come down on making the recommendation that women at that level of increased risk should be offered agents such as chemoprevention. The problem is for us GPs is we're not actually licensed to provide it. But we can do it off license. So there are cancer risk assessment clinics that can be used. Sometimes that counselling falls down to family doctors. Sometimes other sorts of specialists. But I think you're talking about a fairly unusual case with if we're thinking of population level risk. But there are plenty of measures available to support those decisions.
Professor Weller, my question is from you, and it's from one of your sentences that you used in your slide over medicalization of healthy population. What about vaccination? That is one. There is clear evidence that tamoxifen helps in risk reduction, and more so in high-risk groups. Why would you not strengthen the approaches internationally as we have done? Whatever we say about cervical cancer, breast cancer is one of the highest number killers. Why is there no advocacy for chemoprevention for high-risk groups?
So when it comes to prevention of cancers through vaccines, through HPV, hepatitis B, I think we're all probably very much on the same page. These are fantastic leaps forward in healthcare, and we just need to be looking around the world at ways of implementing those programs. But we've looked pretty carefully, haven't we, in the literature about how you do promote uptake of proven agents. And we've known for some time now that tamoxifen and raloxifene reduce breast cancer incidence and should reduce mortality. But it's not making that translational step. It's not. Patients are still rejecting it. Now, does that mean that we should focus on educating patients, or putting more money into trying to promote these drugs, or is there a more fundamental reason that people are rejecting the idea of taking a pill every day of their life to reduce their risks? Now, I'm not advocating that we should stop all existing chemoprevention. I am saying that this ongoing massive investment and this search for new agents is not the best way we could spend our money.
Richard?
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that, and I agree with you, I do think there's an opportunity to apply what we know today more widely. We are missing opportunities. There are women who should be have a clear recommendation for raloxifene or tamoxifen, and people, both genders, for aspirin, no question. The only thing I would want to be clear about is there is not currently a massive investment in chemoprevention research. So, but I believe we need actually some investment. There have been some risk that this whole area could die, and I think that would be a mistake.
As
Is
a
that
gynec
true?
radiation oncologist from India, people laugh at me if I don't start hormone therapy after surgery or radiation after cervical cancer, and they laugh when I have, say, uptake rate is 16%. I think we should do something about chemoprevention for breast cancer.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Really no massive investments in chemoprevention, is that true? What do you mean by massive?
Well, I suppose I'm looking at the money that's been spent on trials to date. I put up one of my slides was about some of the dietary interventions. You know, vitamin E. It's just one example. Those were very major population-based trials, and they cost a lot of money, and they were essentially futile. I mean, we haven't really come up with any dietary type agent that's shown much difference. The ongoing aromatase inhibitor trials and the tamoxifen trials that happened last decade, yes, they came out with some good answers, but they were jolly expensive, and those answers certainly came at a cost.
Okay.
So.
Gentleman over there.
Hi, my name's Terry Slevin. Firstly, I drafted the research of the debate question, so I apologise for those who didn't like it. Nobody ever likes the debate questions. I've learned that much. I actually, in listening to the debate, and firstly I thank you both for an excellent exposition of your sides of the debate, and primarily I was motivated to see it discussed. And really, if I'd put in the words, stop investing public research funds in the chemoprevention trial, if you think that would have changed your approach towards it, Richard, and I'm particularly interested in your view. And one of the things that motivated me was, and I haven't been able to find out while I was standing here, whether I read NCI was investing something in the order of $600 million in chemoprevention trials at the moment. There was, and I'm happy to be corrected if that's incorrect. And the reason I ask specifically about public funds is I see a substantial motive in chemoprevention trial research because it's a saleable product. So in a commercial world, if someone can invest to find an effective chemopreventive agent, that's going to be a valuable commodity, and in the private market, it's likely to be a good private investment. And so for all the competition for cancer prevention research and so much work that we could do, if we put the word stop investing public research funds in the chemoprevention trials, Richard, whether you would slightly change your thinking.
Yeah, thank you. It's a great question. David and I would agree that the trials we do going forward need to be carefully selected. And the days where we took every vitamin and tested them should be over, or every nutrient, unless there's a proper mechanistic evidence. We cannot eliminate public funding for this research because some of these agents with greatest promise, like aspirin, you're not going to get a drug company to invest in. So I think we have to be prepared to go where the science guides us. And it is true, there might be a new agent with a commercial interest, but I'm skeptical about that because what good is chemoprevention from a perspective of producing health equity if it's going to be a terribly expensive drug that millions of people are going to have to take? So I do think we're going to need public investment.
David?
Yeah, there's no doubt, and Rich and I agree on this, that pharma at the moment aren't that interested. They're in the major chemoprevention trials, and particularly for agents that don't cost much. I mean, tamoxifen is even becoming quite cheap. So, you know, from a commercial point of view, they're not that interested. I disagree though with Rich about this sort of cost side of things when it comes to individualised or personalised medicine. I think there's a dark side to personalised medicine where we're creating this inequitous world where people who can afford it will pay for these expensive risk assessments. They'll get their entire genomes done, they'll get all their gene interactions sorted out, they'll get their risk profile given to them, and then they'll have made available to the medications which the majority of the population can't afford. And I think pharma will get interested in that stage if we go down this track. So, you know, I'm not so convinced that there's a strong case here that you know, pharma is thinking about the public good. I think there's a real risk that chemoprevention, particularly in the context of this sort of precision or personalised medicine, I think it carries real dangers of healthcare inequities.
Just a very last question before we wrap up. Do you think you should reward investments as far as cancer prevention is concerned, Richard?
I'm not sure exactly what we mean. There's so many aspects of prevention that everyone here would agree that the overall investment in the prevention space is too low. So whatever set of quote rewards, whether they're just personal satisfaction, that would increase the total investment, they should be pursued. A small fraction of that, but some fraction of that, should continue to pursue chemoprevention.
David?
Yeah, I could hardly not agree that we should invest more in prevention. I'm less convinced, as I think I've made pretty clear, that we should devote a sizable chunk of that to expensive chemoprevention trials over the next decade. I think we face such pressing issues. There are such glaring problems when it comes to rates of smoking, particularly in lower and middle income countries. Why do we have such high prevalence rates still? We have an obesity epidemic. We have high rates of hazardous drinking. This is more than enough to keep us occupied with interventions that we know work. So I'm less convinced that we should be diverting that very finite resource into these very major, expensive trials.
David, you've got 5 minutes to wrap up.
Right, I'm going first, am I? Okay, yep. That's good. So, Rich and I, we're both family doctors, we're chums, and we really come from the same sort of mindset. What we want is what's best for our patients, and I wouldn't mind betting that Richard, despite his croaky voice, perhaps didn't entirely believe some of the arguments that he was making in favour of chemoprevention. What I hope I think what we've both made clear is that there is some evidence that some agents work, and we would list aspirin and NSAIDs and perhaps COX inhibitors and the tamoxifen-related drugs amongst them. And by all means, let's make use of those strategies that we've now got up our sleeve. But let's not kid ourselves that it's going to be easy. And I don't see any evidence at all that in 5 or even 10 years' time, all women who should be taking tamoxifen, who can afford it, will be. I just think there are enormous psychological and cultural barriers to prevent that from happening. So we both agree that yes, there are some agents around. Let's make the best of them. The crux of my argument, I think, comes down to this opportunity cost, and we know that we have cost-effective interventions to reduce smoking, to reduce alcohol. General practitioners or family doctors, if we give advice to about 30 patients, might seem a lot, we can produce one quitter. That's real evidence, but we need more research and more investment in those sorts of opportunities. But in the broader, more sort of sociological sense, do you really want to live in a society where we're obsessed with this holy grail of risk assessment? Can you really see that happening, where we all come up with these, we all get our genomes mapped and are given these complex risk assessments and are given a cocktail of drugs or perhaps surgery to deal with those risks? Now that might be okay for some, but I don't want to live in that sort of medicalised society where we're that dependent on pills. I think we can do a lot better than that in much sort of simpler and much more equitable approaches. So in my view, we should take stock of what we've got. Chemoprevention has a place, but let's, for heaven's sake, stop spending so much money on trials in the future. I think there are much better ways that we can spend our money.
Thank you, David. Richard, you said we're on the cusp of a revolution.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to be a part of the debate. David confessed the truth. We're friends. We have a common background. We share a real commitment to prevention. I like him only a little less now than I did at the start of the debate. No, we are true colleagues. You know, the number was quoted of about how much we're spending on chemoprevention trials today. That may well be enough as long as they're directed wisely. The real debate question is, should we stop investing? So I'm not saying we need to increase. I'm just saying this is not the time to stop investing. There's an opportunity to keep going. Let me share with you this. Over 2 decades ago, a young investigator had an idea that we could get the immune system to combat cancer cells. If you talk to him today, he'll tell you how no one was willing to invest, except for a few of the organizations like ours, the NGOs, including the American Cancer Society. And Jim Allison just won the Nobel Prize this week for his research that led to the development of checkpoint inhibitors. I am not saying that we have another breakthrough of that kind that was going to happen tomorrow or the next day or a year from now or 10 years from now. But sometimes you do have to keep looking, even when you've been looking for quite some time. Even if we just had trials that improved on tamoxifen and raloxifene, that eliminated some of their downsides, we might have an effective chemotherapeutic agent to take on the most common cancer in women. So this is not that moment. Here is something we do need to do, however. Only in oncology would we come up with the name chemoprevention. Now, if you were to say, I have a pill for you, so if you take it, it'll prevent you from ever needing to take chemo. That's a much better way to look at it. But it's a silly and bad name to say chemo prevention, and no primary care doc is going to prescribe chemo for prevention. So what we're really talking about are safe medications that reduce your risk of developing cancer. So not only will we need to invest in the science, we're going to need to invest in some of the marketing and the communication so that when we do find, like we have today, some safe and effective new agents, they will also be accepted and have increase in uptake. Thank you so much for letting me participate.
Thank you, Richard. Can we ask you to do that vote now? If you could go back to your phones on the app. Debate 3, agree or disagree. It was the voice.
My voice is actually fine. I put on the whole thing.
Well, no, I'm coming back up.
7822. We're going to settle with that. Well done, Richard Wender.
Thank you.
Well done. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us today. I think that was enlightening. Opportunity cost is what I took away. We need to spend wisely is what I took away. But you know what? Well done. Our debaters today, Professor David Weller and Dr. Richard Wender. Thank you all very much for joining us today. Have a good trip home for those of you going back, and thank you for being with us.